Welcome to MBTI's 16 personality types and a whole lot more, explained by me, your favourite teddy bear. MBTI, personality types, cognitive functions, are these the same thing? Are they different things? Do any of these things matter, or are they just some made up nonsense like astrology or something? Who knows the answers to these questions? I do, and that's what this video is for. Once upon a time, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was this Swiss crazy guy called Jung, who spent too much time thinking about, thinking. He was a psychologist, being the study of the mind, and he thought up many psychological concepts far ahead of his time. So much so, his peers in the field thought his were just nonsense, not being able to understand them. After a few years passed, his peers realised this crazy guy actually knows what he's talking about, and one of these psychological concepts he made in 1921 was to define personality on a cognitive level, being possibly one of the most useful fruits of his life's work. In his view, personality was merely the difference in how individuals cognitively perceive the world, each having a different mental lens through which we see reality. He called these lenses our attitudes. Attitude, noun. The overarching orientation or predisposition of an individual's energy and focus. This is what led him to decide people are either cognitively introverted or extroverted, as opposed to how they appear in their behaviour. In his model, the direction of one's energy is either inward towards inner reflections and thoughts, introversion, or outward towards external stimuli and interactions, extroversion. To make this easier to understand, think of introversion like a microscope primarily focused on your inner world of thoughts, feelings, and reflections. This doesn't necessarily mean that introverts are shy or socially withdrawn in their behaviour, but rather that their primary focus is cognitively on their internal process. Extroversion, on the other hand, is more like a wide-angle lens on a camera, capturing a broad view of the external world of people's thoughts, feelings, and experiences. This doesn't necessarily mean that extroverts are confident or socially outgoing in their behaviour, but rather that their primary orientation is towards cognitively engaging with the external world and its stimuli. Introversion cognitively focuses internally, while extroversion cognitively orientates externally. However, there's more than two kinds of personality, so he decided to break down introversion and extroversion even more, and came up with 4 different ways someone can be cognitively introverted or extroverted, leading to what he called the 4 cognitive functions. And since each of these 4 functions can be either introverted or extroverted, that means this 4 is actually 8. The 4 cognitive functions, what is commonly called our primary cognitive functions, are thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. When broken down by introversion or extroversion, commonly called our orientated cognitive functions, we have introverted thinking, TI, extroverted thinking, TE, introverted feeling, FI, extroverted feeling, FE, introverted sensing, SI, extroverted sensing, SE, introverted intuition, NI, and extroverted intuition, NE. Now, the problem here is Jung didn't make much of a distinction between the group of 4 cognitive functions and the group of 8 divided by introversion and extroversion. He used the same word for both, cognitive functions. Now, with his model, that wasn't much of an issue, yet for us in the future, since his ideas have been developed and refined by others, making them a bit more complex, calling them by the same name does create some issues of confusion. Now, as I've said, some make the distinction in calling them primary and orientated, yet even that has their issues. That's why I propose calling the 4 primary cognitive functions as cognitive temperaments. Temperament, noun, the innate predisposition that governs an individual's typical patterns of behaviour, especially in how they perceive the world and make decisions. When the 4 cognitive temperaments are combined with the cognitive attitudes, you get the cognitive functions. It's a bit of a hassle, yet it will make more logical sense later on. So, what are the cognitive temperaments, or what Jung called the 4 cognitive functions? First, let's start off with the benefit of hindsight that Jung didn't have. Our modern scientific understanding of feeling and thinking have come a long way since his time, best summarised in Dan Sperberg's and Hugo Meus's book, The Enigma of Reason. Fuck me, that's a book that'll blow your fucking head off. The abridged version is that humans are inherently illogical, and reason only exists to justify what we emotionally value. Emotions or feelings exist to find out what we need, and rationality or thinking exists to get us what we value, regardless if it's logical or true or not. In truth, everyone on the planet is only as logical as much as logic will get them what they need, and that is the relationship between thinking and feeling. Feeling, as described by Jung and matches up with our current scientific understanding, is the cognitive domain of emotions, values, and sentimentalism. It's the cognitive lens through which your brain assigns value. On the most basic level, good emotions, this is wanted, bad emotions, that is not wanted. Emotions are there for us to feel what is needed to help guide our behaviour, whether for us or someone else. When introverted, being introverted feeling, it's all about the internal process of aligning what you personally value in your deep moral compass, aiming to be clear and resistant to change. I want to do or need this. I don't want to do or need that. When FI is applied externally, it can be best described as a sympathetic detachment from everyone else, not feeling others' emotions as opposed to just understanding them. When extroverted, being extroverted feeling, it's all about the process of harmoniously orienting yourself to what everyone collectively values. We want to do that because they need this, and do not want to do or need that. When FE is applied internally, it can best be described as empathetically attempting to integrate everyone's emotions and values into your own, feeling their needs as your own. Feeling's friend and dance partner is thinking. Thinking is the cognitive domain of beliefs, logic, and rationalism. It's the cognitive lens through which your brain evaluates information and assigns your beliefs to rationalize your values. On the most basic level, this is true and that is not true. Beliefs are there for us to decide how we understand the world we live in and what we logically have to do to follow our values. When introverted, being introverted thinking, it's all about the internal process of aligning what you personally believe in your deep internal beliefs, aiming to be clear and resistant to change. I believe this because of X, Y, and Z. When TI is applied externally, it can best be described as an analytic detachment from everyone else, not understanding others' rationality as opposed to just projecting their own on them. When extroverted, being extroverted thinking, it's all about the process of pragmatically orienting yourself to what everyone collectively believes. Z is true because that's what you get when you add everyone's X's and Y's together. When TE is applied internally, it can best be described as pragmatically attempting to integrate everyone's beliefs and rationality, organising them as your own. In the same way extroverted feeling collectivizes values, extroverted thinking collectivizes beliefs. Now let's move on to sensing and intuition, which is less about how we should act in reality and more how we should see it. To define our reality, we rely on our five senses to build a map of the empirical, objective world around us. This map is our tangible understanding of what is real, but we must trust that our senses are accurate. In truth, we can never fully know what is real, as it takes consciousness to define it. Naturally, there are gaps in this map, areas we haven't or can't objectively see yet or ever. This is where intuition comes in. Sensing constructs the map with concrete details, while intuition fills in the gaps, predicting and imagining what could be based on patterns and possibilities. Together, they create a fuller picture of our reality, with sensing grounding us in the present and intuition exploring what lies beyond. Sensing is the cognitive domain of observation, recollection, and empiricism. It's the cognitive lens through which your brain perceives and organises information from your five senses, helping you construct a tangible understanding of objective reality. On the most basic level, I'm at the beach because I can taste the salt in the air, see the ocean, feel the sand between my toes, and I can remember being here before, as well as remember all of these words to even describe what a beach is. Observation is there for us to map and navigate our reality by staying grounded in the realities of the moment based on what is objectively perceived. When introverted, being introverted sensing, it's all about the internal process of aligning what you personally recall from past sensory observations to guide you in your present objective reality. I remember the taste of salt in the air and the feeling of sand between my toes from previous visits to this beach, and this current experience matches those memories. When SI is applied externally, it can best be described as a traditionalistic detachment from everyone else's lived observations, not seeking new sensory observations from others as opposed to reaffirming and projecting their own familiar map of objective reality. When extroverted, being extroverted sensing, it's all about the process of actively orienting yourself to what everyone collectively observes. We're at the beach, and I can feel the heat of the sun, the sand between my toes, and those over there are wet and cooler while playing in the waves. We all remember being here before. This is the beach. When SE is applied internally, it can best be described as spontaneously attempting to integrate others' observations and recollections into their own map of objective reality. Intuition is the cognitive domain of speculation, prediction, and idealism. It's the cognitive lens through which your brain perceives patterns, possibilities, and connections, helping you construct abstract answers to fill in the gaps of your objective reality. On the most basic level, I know it's sunny on this beach right now, and the weatherman said it wasn't going to rain today, yet those clouds are dark. I think it's going to rain later, and then all those fish hidden in the water will start jumping. I wonder if those fish will evolve to fly one day. Speculation is there for us to navigate the unknown by anticipating and envisioning what could be, even when the information is incomplete or indirect. When introverted, being introverted intuition, it's all about the internal process of aligning what you personally speculate of abstract patterns, possibilities, and insights within your mind, aiming to see the underlying meaning and foresight of events. I have a gut feeling it will rain, and those fish are under the water and will jump when it does, because it somehow just makes sense from everything I've seen over time. When NI is applied externally, it can best be described as a visionary detachment from everyone else's perspectives, not foreseeing others' visions as opposed to just projecting their own onto the situation. When extroverted, being extroverted intuition, it's all about the process of dynamically orienting yourself to what everyone collectively speculates. It could rain later, or maybe those dark clouds are just passing by. What if the fish start jumping because the weather is changing? Or maybe it's something else entirely. What else could this mean? Maybe they won't jump. What if they fly instead? When NI is applied internally, it can best be described as dynamically attempting to integrate others' speculations and predictions, visualizing all these new possibilities and connections as their own. To review, we have our cognitive attitudes, being introversion and extroversion. Then we have our cognitive temperaments, traditionally called primary cognitive functions, being thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. When overlapped, we get the 8 cognitive functions, being TI, TE, FI, FE, SI, SE, NI, and NE. In Jung's model, everyone has one of these 8 cognitive functions as their dominant function, which forms the core of their personality type. His model has 8 different personalities, but that's 8. So where did 16 personalities come from? After he published these ideas in 1921, pretty much no one cared. Psychology at the time largely focused on empirical research, behaviourism, and psychoanalysis, and his ideas simply did not fit into that. So yeah, f*** what he was saying. However, there were a few people that listened to what he said and found value in it, and one of those people was a housewife with no formal education in psychology called Catherine Cook Briggs. Briggs was fascinated by his model enough to not only study it in depth, but also enough to reach out to him with admiration and giving her thoughts and insights, having a brief back and forth. Catherine, with her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers, who was also a deep thinker interested in personality herself, spent the next 20 years thinking and further refining these ideas, until during the 1940s they released their earliest version of their personality model, which was mostly used to help women find what work roles they'd best be suited in during the war. It was during this time that Jung's ideas finally started to grow in influence and be taken more seriously. This model Briggs released was called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI for short. About 40 years later, after Catherine died of old age in 1968, Isabel published the book Gifts Differing in 1980, being the final version of her and her mother's life's work being their MBTI model for cognitively understanding and categorizing personality. So how does this MBTI model refine and differ from Jung's model? Well, for one, the more they looked into people's dominant functions, the more they realised that 2 DOMs of a function aren't exactly the same. In Jung's model, people's personality are only defined by one function, yet Briggs, wanting to explain this difference, considered what if people don't have one function, but 2, a dominant function and an auxiliary one used to complement the dominant. And the more she looked into that, she not only found that appeared to be true, yet there was a very consistent pattern that whatever someone's dominant was, there was only 2 possible functions that could be the auxiliary. Whatever one's dominant function would be, the auxiliary would be inverted. If the dominant is extroverted, then the auxiliary is introverted, and vice versa. And if the dominant is either thinking or feeling, then the auxiliary is either sensing or intuition, and vice versa. Other than adding one more function to define someone's personality, one other refinement of Jung's ideas was that there must be a significant connection between thinking versus feeling, and between sensing versus intuition. Jung did have one half-baked idea that he never went into too deeply in with this connection. He only slightly noticed, which he regarded feeling and thinking as cognitively rational and sensing and intuition as cognitively irrational. Now, Briggs looked at that, thought about it, and realised there's a more logical way to see them that fits better to explain all this. What if it's not about rationality or irrationality, but what if it's about judgment and perception? What if these cognitive lenses have different jobs, one judging the world looking at it like a to-do list, and the other perceiving the world looking at it like a map? The more they thought about it that way, the more sense it made, deciding judging and perceiving is an attitude, resulting in thinking and feeling being the judging functions, and sensing and intuition being the perceiving functions. Briggs chose these terms over rationality and irrationality because they observed that judging types tend to prefer structure and decisions, treating life like a to-do list, while perceiving types prefer to stay open and flexible, treating life like a map to explore, and both of these can be rational or irrational, depending on the context. She added this new metric to Jung's original model, so these 8 possible personality types turned into 16. With me so far? Yeah, didn't think so. What Briggs did by introducing the concept of judging and perceiving from adding the auxiliary is they ended up creating the cognitive stack, seeing people's personality as not just their dominant function, but multiple functions stacked on top of each other. By stacking the dominant on top of the auxiliary, they noticed people also had 2 more lower functions expressed far less being cognitive weaknesses, yet there nonetheless. There's the dominant first function, which you can think of as the one driving the car and ultimately deciding where and how to drive. Then there's the second function, being the auxiliary, which you can think of as the nagging wife in the passenger's seat having a strong influence on the husband in the driver's seat. The third function is called the tertiary, which you can think of it as the 10-year-old child in the backseat complaining, "Are we there yet?" And the fourth is called the inferior, which you can think of it as the 2-year-old that can barely talk and mostly just cries and shits itself. What's important to know about these bottom 2 functions is whatever functions are in the top 2 slots, only one possible combination remains for the 3rd and 4th slots, using the other 2 functions left in the opposite orientation. That and these bottom 2 functions are very weak and underdeveloped, especially the inferior. I think if IQ tests were made for each function, I think everyone would fit the definition of mentally retarded in terms of their inferior function.
I don't think you're allowed to say that word.
I'm not disparaging the differently able. I'm stating the fact that if I had used this microscope, it would have made me mentally retarded.
I don't think it's about logic. The word has just become a symbolic issue for groups that feel like they're doing the right thing.
Well, that's retarded.
Now, traditionally, the MBTI model regarded the bottom 2 functions as part of our subconscious, and the 4 functions in each stack we haven't talked about is called the shadow functions, which are regarded as not existing. Under this model, a personality only has 4 of the 8 functions, and 2 of them are very weak and hard to see, even subconscious. Me, however, this is one of the ways I differ with the MBTI model. Others have added to and refined the MBTI model over the years, from David Kersey, John Beebe, Dario Nardi, and this is one of my refinements. Based on all I've read and what I've seen, I'm of the belief that the bottom 2 functions are in our consciousness. They're just very weak and vestigial, having the cognitive development of a child and toddler. The shadow stack, I believe, is just as developed as our conscious cognitive stack, yet it's deeply buried in our subconscious and influences us in the background in ways we don't see unless we're paying attention. So an ISFP, for example, isn't just an ISFP with FI as its greatest strength and TE as its greatest weakness. This ISFP also has an ESFJ that can't talk deep in their subconscious, operating in the backgrounds that has FE as their greatest strength and TI as their greatest weakness. We're not just one personality, we're 2. That's just what I've observed the more time I've spent looking at personality, which may or may not be true, but is. Give or take, these are the main differences in how Jung's ideas were refined. Yet Briggs did one more thing, which is make these ideas more practical and easier for most normal people to use. The thing they're most well known for, which they released in the 1940s, was making a self-assessment personality test for this model, which was pretty useful in helping people learn more about themselves, and numerous companies started using it to help better identify which of their employees are best suited for each role. But how do these tests work? There are different ways they can be done, but the basic idea is asking questions to try and judge what cognitive functions a person appears to be using and what order they're using to help figure out what their cognitive stack is. Now, as a guide, this is a fairly useful tool helping give people an idea where to look. But unfortunately, this was one of the biggest mistakes Briggs made in not treating this as a guide, but as a full-fledged self-assessment model, which has been the main argument psychologists have used to declare MBTI as a pseudoscience. It's not as bad as it used to be, yet psychology still won't accept MBTI in even these core ideas of Jung that they're based on, because mainstream psychology loves their empiricism, and simply put, making these ideas as self-assessment is fundamentally flawed. It's flawed to think everyone will always get the right result using a self-assessment in MBTI, for the same reason why it would be flawed to think everyone will always get the right result using a self-assessment in psychiatry. People are idiots. In my experience, these online MBTI self-assessments are only correct about half the time, because about half the population lack the knowledge, self-awareness or honesty to answer the questions correctly. Everybody lies, more often than not, to themselves. You ask an anorexic if they're fat, there's a good chance they'll answer yes and believe it. You ask an IFBB bodybuilder if they're underweight, there's a good chance they'll answer yes and believe it. If you ask an intuitive thinker if they're good at thinking abstractly, there's a good chance they'll believe they're only average or below average. You ask a sensing feeler if they're good at remembering what's important, there's a good chance they'll believe they're only average or below average. It's human nature to project our own experiences onto the rest of society regarding them as normal, and even downplay them, since people generally want to do better, and the best way of doing that is focusing on the flaws of what you want to get better at. These self-tests don't test for cognitive functions as much as subtly test what cognitive functions people think they're using, which will only give a correct result if people are honest and self-aware enough. So okay, self-testing is a guide that may or may not be true. So that means paying someone who's trained in this to give you a one-to-one consultation to find your type for you? Well, there's an issue with that too, since the mainstream won't touch any form of typology. Things like MBTI are not legally protected. Literally anyone can practice or run a course and hand out some toilet paper degree if they can at least sound like they know what they're talking about and then tell people what they want to hear anyway. And in my experience, most of the people I've come across that do it professionally don't actually know what they're talking about. Most of the people I've come across that do know what they're talking about this almost never tend to advertise it and hide behind some course or degree, as opposed to just debate their point and be right about it. So with self-assessments and consultations having these issues, wanting to know your type only really leaves two options. Spend years and years learning it yourself, or do your homework and find someone that does know what they're talking about. Understanding your true MBTI type isn't just about knowing yourself better, it's about unlocking a path that aligns with who you truly are. If you can find your correct type, it should not only help you understand yourself that much more, but it should also help guide you to a career and lifestyle you're best suited at in your cognitive strengths, giving you genuine fulfillment, embracing an identity that resonates with who you really are, as opposed to molding yourself to an identity you never were. This is where the real value of MBTI lies, not just in knowing your type, but in using it to live a life that feels authentic and satisfying. To review, a temperament describes what cognitive tools people have at their disposal to engage with the world. These temperaments are either thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition, which is to either rationalize, value, observe, or predict. These are the cognitive tools one has to use to move through the world. There are 4 different combinations of temperaments: intuitive thinking, NT, intuitive feeling, NF, sensing thinking, ST, and sensing feeling, SF. An attitude explains cognitively how people are to use their cognitive tools to engage with the world. These attitudes are either introversion or extroversion, which is either looking at their world through a microscope or wide-angle lens camera, and judging or perceiving, which is either looking at their world as a map to navigate or as a to-do list to work on. These are the cognitive guides one has on how to use their cognitive tools. There are 4 different combinations of attitudes: introverted judging, IJ, extroverted judging, EJ, introverted perceiving, IP, and extroverted perceiving, EP. When you combine the cognitive temperaments and the cognitive attitudes, you get the 8 cognitive functions and 16 possible cognitive stack combinations of them. These 16 combinations are ENTJ, ENTP, INTP, INTJ, ENFJ, ENFP, INFP, INFJ, ESTJ, ESTP, ISTP, ISTJ, ESFJ, ESFP, ISFP, and ISFJ. The cognitive stack includes a dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior function, forming a hierarchy of cognitive strengths and weaknesses that influence how individuals interact with the world. And in the background, there's the shadow acting subconsciously. MBTI's ideas check out, yet the testing has its flaws, being the main reasons many psychologists use to unfairly dismiss it. Some just regard it as little more than a pseudoscience like astrology, when in truth it fits the definition of a rational psychology like psychoanalysis and psychiatry. Hopefully one day the testing methods will be taken more seriously, in line with how Jung saw it. Are we done now? Not yet, for we have one last topic to cover here which should help all of this make more sense. In the 1970s, around about the time MBTI was really growing in popularity in the Western world, and the Soviets were busy engaging in one of their favourite hobbies of stealing Western technology and creating their own crappy iterations of them, the Soviets saw the popularity of MBTI in the West and decided to make their own, with blackjack and hookers. Some Lithuanian psychologists with a name I'm not even going to bother trying to pronounce basically ignored everything Briggs found other than the idea of having a cognitive stack, and then proceeded to take Jung's original ideas and then completely bastardize them into oblivion, with a brand new personality model fresh off the Iron Curtain called socionics. So what is this socionics thing and why does it matter? Well, remember earlier when I said psychology in Jung's time largely focused on empirical research, behaviourism and psychoanalysis? We'll need to talk about that a little more first. Empiricism is a philosophy that asserts knowledge comes from sensory experience and observation. It emphasises the importance of evidence gathered through the senses and argues that all concepts and ideas should be tested and validated through direct experience or experimentation. Behaviourism is a psychology for understanding personality based on that philosophy. It focuses on the idea that all behaviours are learned through interaction with the environment, and that internal states like thoughts, emotions, or intentions are either irrelevant or secondary to understanding behaviour. Empirical behaviourism specifically stresses the importance of empirical evidence, data collected through direct observation and experimentation in studying behaviour. This approach contrasts with theories that emphasises introspection or exploration of unconscious processes, such as Kraepelian psychiatry, Freudian psychoanalysis, and Jungian cognitivism. Those psychological theories come under the philosophy of rationalism, which asserts that knowledge comes from reason and logic independent of sensory input. See, in the beginning, Jung was actually a student of Freud, studying under him in his school of psychoanalysis, being a rationalistic psychology, and it was from that school Jung developed his ideas of cognition. One could even say cognitivism is a branch of psychoanalysis. However, over time, as Jung's ideas became more refined and complex, it strained Jung's and Freud's friendship, since it deviated too far away from psychoanalysis to be considered the same field. Freud eventually turned his back on Jung, considering his ideas too metaphysical even for him, and not easily applicable in therapeutic practice. That's what led to that little split, and that was bad news for Jung since that left him without any friends, with the only other school being empirical behaviourism, which never even liked psychoanalysis, let alone Jung's ideas. The only reason psychoanalysis survived mainstream psychology was because it was relatively simple to understand and clinically useful in therapy. The deeper complexity of cognitivism is what let it down in the rationalistic side of mainstream psychology, when really it was the right direction, but simply just too far ahead of its time. One of the reasons why mainstream psychologists have had such a prejudice against Jung and MBTI in this, throwing the baby out with the bathwater and won't give it the time of day to look at it any further, is because psychology really loves their empiricism, and the fact is, defining the cogs and wheels of the mind is a really complicated abstract field which is really hard to objectively prove. Jung rationalistically defined it the way he did, being the internal mental processes for how information is perceived and decisions are made, for a very good reason. We are talking about the mind, which is inherently abstract, not merely one's behaviours. If you want empiricism when studying the mind, become a neurologist. Yet when it comes to the abstract nature of the mind, it's not that simple. It's not enough to look at what behaviour one is doing and what role they appear to play in society. You have to look at the context and ask why they're doing it on a cognitive level. This is why the only fields of value that have come out of psychology are based in rationalism, because this is the only approach flexible enough to map the abstract aspects of the mind. It's not perfect, inevitably having a lot of swings and misses along the way, yet it's the best we've got, directly opposed to said empirical behaviourism, instead being what we could call rational cognitivism. This isn't to say rationalism and empiricism are mutually exclusive, because in science they're not, being two different tools for studying reality. Yet this behaviourism, it's just bad science, starting from a false assumption that environment causes behaviour as opposed to merely influences it, with one's mind either being irrelevant or merely a byproduct of that causal relationship. And since behaviourism and others based on it is the only empirical model psychology currently has for studying cognition, then this really only leaves rationalism, and it'll stay that way until we have computer chips in our brains having the ability to read each other's thoughts. When neurology has got that advanced, then the day will come which empiricism will have the tools to be able to empirically study the mind. But why am I bringing all this up? Well, when Comrade Unpronounceable was deciding to create socionics out of Jung's ideas, she did it by completely reinterpreting his rational cognitive ideas within the framework of empirical behaviourism. As already discussed, the main difference between Jung's model and MBTI is Jung believed our personality can be defined by one cognitive function, whereas MBTI said two, which inadvertently ended up being four. But the common ground Jung and MBTI had was they both defined cognitive functions in terms of internal mental processes for how information is perceived and decisions are made. We all have our cognitive strengths and completely lack others, and that is what lenses we use to perceive and judge everything. It's why they're called cognitive functions, because it's the cognitive process that explains how people see and act in the world. Socionics, however, decided to go one step further and decide we use all 8 functions, but not in the sense that 4 of them are in our subconscious. No, we have and use all 8, and the only difference between us in this lovely age of communist equality is the order and preference we use them, empirically assigning a behaviour or set of behaviours to each function and how they interact with each other. Socionics treats these functions as a matter of order and preference for behaviours rather than innate cognitive strengths and deficiencies. By changing what Jung was talking about that much, that creates a few little teeny tiny problems, and that it ends up completely changing the definition of what a cognitive function is, reinterpreting it by external behaviour and social dynamics, starting from the false assumption that the mind causes behaviour as opposed to merely influences it. Jung said our cognitive lenses for how we see the world affect and influence our behaviour. So Socionics said, aha! Just look at the behaviour and assign a cognitive function to it, and that will tell us what cognitive functions they're using, effectively turning it from a cognitive model for personality into a behavioural model. And if you want to define personality purely by behaviour, then that's fine other than it being wrong, yet it's not a cognitive model. Behaviour does not equal cognition. Behaviours are external manifestations that may or may not accurately reflect one's internal cognitive preferences. You can't simply just assert a behaviour as being a cognitive function. It doesn't work that way. There being far more factors that go into one's behaviour. There's one's environment, one's beliefs, one's emotions, one's memories, culture, goals, mental health status, internal expectations, external expectations, obstacles, desires, one's level of honesty and self-awareness, one's level of safety and freedom, and whether or not they had their morning coffee or not. All of that and more are part of the melting pot that influence behaviour, hence why you can't simply look at one's behaviour and casually assign functions to them, all this being contextual on a case-by-case basis. For example, hypothetically, let's say there's this ESTP that has a high IQ and has been nurtured well in higher education. And hypothetically, this particular ESTP also has a neurological disorder that affects hand-eye coordination, balance, and just basic physical stuff, meaning this individual will struggle with sports and other outdoor stuff you commonly stereotypically associate with your average ESTP and their dominant SE nature. As such, their SE is focused more on books, taking in objective information and lots of it. Not being able to use their body effectively, they use their mind instead to learn and remember all of these facts and ideas, yet not doing much in the way of creating their own abstract ideas, just objectively learning other people's and using them to form their own belief system. Then, hypothetically, say one of these abstract ideas this ESTP objectively learns while they're busy going through the university process studying psychology is this objective behaviourism based model for learning personality called socionics. Then, hypothetically, using that objective understanding of abstract ideas, this ESTP may very well look at their behaviour and decide they must be an ENTP, because look at all those abstract ideas of other people they objectively think about all the time, and look how bad they are with all this sensory stuff. Being an inferior intuitive, it's not like they'd really know the difference between thinking of abstract ideas and thinking abstractly. Hypothetically, that would explain why their behaviour doesn't stereotypically match up with their dominant and inferior cognitive functions. Enough for them to falsely believe themselves to be an ENTP, enough for them to make an entire YouTube channel about it, spreading more misinformation about it all, and charging people for typing them when they haven't even got their own type right from not even understanding the difference between SE and NE. Okay? Calm. Kittens. Flowers. I mean, this is all bull. You can't just redefine the definition of cognitive functions. There are rules and structures for all of this. You can't just make this up as you go along. Kittens, flowers, sunshine, kittens, boobies, kittens and boobies. Jennifer Lawrence! Okay, I'm better now. Where was I? Oh yes, socionics. I know it's really tempting for psychologists to use this socionics model of behaviourism because it makes these Jungian abstract ideas of cognition easy and simple to measure, but it doesn't measure it because the point has been lost in translation and amounts to little more than a stereotype-based behavioural model for personality, not a cognitive one. Unlike MBTI practitioners that focus on the cognitive functions under the surface influencing one's behaviour in various circumstances, socionics practitioners focus on observable patterns of behaviour and social roles, and assign cognitive functions to them. It's like the deaf from birth trying to understand music by learning to read sheet music. It's objective, but it completely misses the essence of what is being measured. the experience and emotion of the music itself and how it makes us feel. By measuring the pure behaviour to label one's mind and personality, it misses the point of truly understanding the unique ways we perceive and judge the world, and help us live in alignment with our true selves and understanding everyone's true nature under the surface. Something like an ESFJ and ISFP can on the surface engage in apparently the exact same behaviour for cognitively very different reasons. The why is what matters in order to understand. Stereotypes have their uses, like giving you an idea where to start from and look, yet ultimately context matters and is required to understand this correctly. To review, Carl Jung's original ideas on cognitive functions describe how people perceive the world and make decisions, leading to his model of 8 different personality types. MBTI expanded on Jung's work by adding auxiliary functions, creating the concept of the cognitive stack, and introducing judging and perceiving attitudes. This refinement turned Jung's 8 types into 16 personality types we know today in the MBTI model. There's the limitations of self-assessment in MBTI, the criticisms it faces from mainstream psychology, and why it's essential to approach these tools with caution and understanding. Lastly, we have MBTI being the ugly duckling which is the most right of the bunch, and then we have Socionics which has lost the plot, shifting the focus from cognitive processes to external behaviours, and why that difference matters. While MBTI stays true to the internal workings of the mind, understanding personality through cognitive strengths and weaknesses, Socionics strays by tying personality too closely to observable behaviour, losing the essence of what truly drives our actions. The risk here is oversimplification. By reducing complexity of human cognition to mere behaviour, which misses the deeper, more meaningful insight into how we perceive, think, and make decisions. True understanding of the mind requires looking beyond what we do to why we do it. Only then we can truly grasp the depths of human personality. Thank you very much for watching.